Hello, my name is Marco Treviso, and I'll be doing a short video presentation about the Indians of Texas. I'll begin with an introduction, and then in the middle of this video, I'll be talking about some Indian tribes that I believe was an importance to me in the research of this paper. And then towards the end will be the conclusion. The first people to inhabit the land in North America were the Indians, who appeared as far as the time that the mammoths existed. The Indians at the time depended on hunting game, meat, and a collection of wild fruits such as the prickle pear. With the time, their mode of living evolved as it was transformed by both human and physical processes. An example of one physical process that transformed the lives of the Indians was the extinction of larger game such as the mammoth, leading to the Indian settling for smaller game meat from animals such as hare and even snakes. The coming of the European settlers was a human process that had a major impact on the lives of the Indians. There were constant struggles between the Indians and the white settlers, which resulted to the Indians being driven further south into Texas. European colonization and settlement of North America and other areas of the so-called New World was an invasion of territory, controlled and settled for centuries by Native Americans. To be sure, Indian control and settlement of the land looked different to European as compared to the Indian eyes. Nonetheless, Indian groups received the Europeans' arrival as an encroachment, and they pursued any number of avenues to deal with their invasions. That the Indians were unsuccessful in the long run in resisting or establishing a more favorable accommodations with the Europeans was much the result of impact on Indians of European diseases as superior force of arms. Moreover, to view the situation from Indian perspective is essential in understanding the complex interactions of these very different peoples. European expansion into North America, whether to find gold, escape religious persecution, or start a new life, led to the destruction of Native American livelihoods. Disease was a major killer, followed by malnutrition. Colonists in search of gold staged violent ambushes on tribal village, fueling animosity with natives. Several wars broke out between the tribes and American settlers, which led to the large death tolls, land dispossession, oppression, and blatant racism. After the American Revolution, many Native Americans' lives were already lost to the disease and displacement. In 1830, the Federal Indian Removal Act called for the removal of the 5 civilized tribes, the Cherokee, Chickasaw, Choctaw, Creek, and Seminole. Between 1830 and 1838, federal officials working on behalf of white corn growers forced nearly 100,000 Indians out of their homeland. The dangerous journey from the southern states to Indian Territory in current Oklahoma is referred to the Trails of Tears, in which 4,000 Cherokee people died of cold, hunger, and disease. The Cherokee lived in the southeastern region around Missouri. The effect of war and major epidemics caused the Cherokee to migrate willingly to the west in places such as Texas and Arkansas with the hope they would preserve their culture. Some who had opted to remain in the southeastern region experienced forceful removal into the Indian Territory in what was called the Trails of Tears. The Cherokee lived near the Red River as they became pushed by the settlement of the Americans. In 1820, around 120 families under the reign of the chief dual settler near the Cadiz and the Rux region. As more and more Americans settled close to them, there was no little test between the Cherokees and the Americans. The Cherokees therefore developed a friendship with Mexico to safeguard the ownership of their land. The friendship they had made with Mexico was to make them maintain a neutral position during the Texas Revolution. There was, however, a forceful advocate for the Cherokee tribe. Sam Houston was a member of the tribe through adoption, where he helped in negotiations of a permanent reserve that is located in Texas. The demands were, however, not met by Congress of Texas. The reign of President Lamar saw the Cherokee engaging in war against Texas. In 1839, the Cherokee were defeated and then taken to the Indian Territory. The Chickasaw happened to be among the most prosperous tribes of Indians in America before they relocated to Texas. Their previous habitation included areas of Kentucky, Tennessee, Mississippi, and Alabama. They depended on both hunting and agriculture for their survival. They were the first to encounter the Spanish in the middle of the 16th century. In the 1840s, the Chickasaw were forced to move to the Indian Territory in Oklahoma after they had tried to resist the American invasion of their land. So some of the members of the Chickasaw refused to settle in the reservation area, and they ended up settling around the Red River and the Nacogdoches. They were heavily terrorized by the raiding of the Comanche, while the government offered to increase the security in the Red River in the Burt's Fort Treaty of 1843. During the Civil War, the Chickasaw were on the side of the Confederacy, and they soon lost their culture after the war as their territory served as a passage for traders. The Comanche, exceptional horsemen who dominated the southern plains, played a prominent role in Texas frontier history throughout the much of 18th and 19th centuries. Anthropological evidence indicates that they were originally a mountain tribe, a branch of the northern Shoshones, who roamed the Great Basin region of the western United States as crudely equipped hunters and gatherers. After their arrival on the Great Plains, the Comanches began a southern migration that was encouraged by a combination of factors. By moving south, they had a greater access to the mustangs of the Southwest. The warm climate and abundant buffalo were additional incentives for the southern migration. A vast area of the South Plains, including much of north central and west Texas, soon became Comanche country. The Comanche were a powerful and strong Indian tribe. The tribe were comprised of active bands that totaled to not less than 8, with 5 of those bands being key members to shape the history of Texas. The Comanche controlled trade and the trade items that were sold. The goods that were mainly sold were agriculture produce and products from buffalo and horses. The Comanche contributed many items in trade as they were expert hunters and had many horses that had used in hunting. The 18th century was characterized with constant raids by the Comanche on the Spanish. The problem escalated until in 1785, where the Spanish made a peace treaty with the Comanche. The peace treaty was not honored by the Spanish, and the Comanche resumed their raiding on the Spanish. Soon after the Texas Revolution, some of the Americans wanted to settle on the plains of Texas on the western region. This area was inhabited by Comanche, and they strongly refused Americans from encroaching onto their land. Both sides were hesitant to give up as the Comanche launched attacks against the frontier, while the frontier stood the ground and retaliated. It was during the reign of President Marabou Lamar that the conflicts reached the peak. The strategy that the President Lamar used was successful in succeeding in driving the Comanche to the west of the Red River, but a large collateral damage to both of the sides struggled. The diseases, however, overpowered the Comanche tribe, and their number was greatly reduced. Due to the decrease in the number, the Comanches ended up in the Indian Territory in Oklahoma, while some adamant and managed to counter the spread of Americans west of the Texas Hill Country. In the 1870s, the Comanche tribe waged wars on the hunters of buffaloes at a place known as Adobe Walls. This act by the Comanche triggered a retaliation reaction from the U.S. Army that was led by Colonel Ronald McKenzie. The U.S. Army destroyed the horses that the Comanche people had, rendering them powerless, as the culture of the Comanche could not survive without the existence of the horses. They had become heavily dependent on the horses to help in hunting and raiding, which was no longer possible after the destruction of their horses. The Red River War ended up in Palo Duro, and the Comanche started to a transition that would eventually leave them in a restoration life. On the westward side, the Arapahoes occupied the present-day Nebraska, Dakotas, and Colorado up to the Rockies. On the eastern side, the Arapahoes occupied the area around the region of Arizona and Kansas. Nomadism was their mode of life as they followed game while hunting it. They were mainly known for the hunting buffalo. Socially, they had developed a good friendship with the people of the Southern Cheyenne. The Comanche were their rivals due to competition that arose from the same nomadic lifestyles, leading to a disagreement over the extent of individual territories in the late 18th century and 19th century. The differences between the Arapaho and the Comanche had to be resolved by 1840 so that they could join forces against the invasion of Americans. A series of confrontations between the Army and the Arapaho were moved to Wyoming, and a reservation on host the survivors of the remnants of the confrontations. Another reservation was built near Oklahoma City in the year 1869 to host a tribe branch from the south. The battles continued throughout the years, raging havoc on both sides of the aisle. On November 29, 1864, one of the most infamous events of the American Indian Wars occurred, when 650 Colorado volunteer forces attacked a Cheyenne and Arapaho encampment along Sand Creek. Although they had already begun to peace negotiations with the U.S. government, more than 150 natives were killed and mutilated, and more than two-thirds of which were women and children. The Red River War of 1874. During the summer of 1874, the U.S. Army launched a campaign to remove the Comanche, Kiowa, Southern Cheyenne, Arapaho Indian tribes from the Southern Plains and enforce their relocation to reservation in Indian Territory. The actions of 1874 were unlike any prior attempts by the Army to pacify this area of western frontier. The Red River War led to the end of the entire way of life for the Southern Plain tribes and brought about a new chapter in Texas history. A number of factors led to the military campaigns against the Indians. Westward bound settlers came into conflict with the nomadic tribes that claimed the Buffalo Plains as their homeland during the 19th century. To provide a measure of protection for these settlers, the Army established a series of frontier forts. The outbreak of civil war resulted in a withdrawal of the military from the western frontier. The Indians took advantage of the situation and aggressively exerted control over their southern plains. There was an outcry for the government to take action. The Medicine Lodge Treaty of 1867 called for the restoration to be assigned in Indian Territory, one of the Comanche and Kiowa, and other for the Southern Cheyenne Arapaho. According to the treaty, the government would provide the tribes with a variety of basic services and training, housing, foods, and supplies, including guns and ammunition for the hunting. The goods would be allotted to the tribes each year for a 30-year period, and the Indian tribes would be allowed to continue to hunt on any land south of Arkansas River to long as the buffalo may range thereon. In exchange, the Indians agreed to stop their attacks and raids. 10 chiefs endorsed the treaty, and many tribal members moved voluntarily to the reservations. Palo Duro Canyon. On September 28, 1874, Colonel Ronald Mackenzie, at the head of the 4th U.S. Cavalry, attacked and destroyed a large Indian encampment in Palo Duro Canyon. Mackenzie's troopers formed part of the Red River Campaign of 1874-75, organized to force the Kiowa, Cheyenne, and Comanche to return to the reservation. On September 28, Mackenzie's scouts followed the Indian Trail to the edge of Palo Duro Canyon before the soldiers descended the steep slopes of the valley floor 700 feet below. Taken by surprise, the Indians abandoned their villages, allowing Mackenzie to capture more than 1,100 horses that were later slaughtered to prevent recapture. Although few Indians or soldiers were killed, the unrelenting pursuit of the troopers and the cold weather ultimately forced the Indians to surrender, thus bringing us to a close the Red River War. Part of the battlefield is located within the Palo Duro Canyon State Park. The Cheyenne were traditional agriculturalists, practicing agriculture in the Black Hills region. After they learned about horses, they changed their lifestyle and adopted to the nomadic culture while in pursuit of buffalo. Together with their close allies, the Arapahoes, they dominated the land between the Platte and the Arkansas rivers. The Iowa, Apache, and the Comanche were the traditional enemies of the Cheyenne, and the disputes that they had were resolved in 1840. The 1850s saw the existence of difference with the Cheyenne community regarding the problem their community was facing. The Cheyenne then enjoyed relative peace for about 10 years, where their main focus was trading with Americans, Mexicans, and other Indian tribes. The community was dealing with the disease of cholera, declining of population of buffalo, as well as the threat by the expansion of Americans on the camping sites and the grounds of hunting. Some of the chiefs opted to hold peaceful negotiations with Americans, while yet another section, commonly referred to as the Dog Soldiers, relentlessly waged wars on the Americans. The U.S. Army was engaged in a number of wars that meant to crush the Southern Cheyenne. There were 2 places where the battles are known to have taken place. The battle at Sand Creek in 1864, and as I talked earlier, was the Battle of the Red River in 1868. These battles led to the Cheyenne moving and settling in a reservation in Oklahoma. Many of the Indian tribes that roamed Texas have, in one form or another, have come across experience the encroachment of English civilizations. Engagement in wars was also inevitable for Indian tribes who lived in Texas. There are several reasons that have been put forward as explanations for the wars among the Indian tribes. Initially, the Indians were living through the northern continent of America, where they had spread out, resources were abundant. After the coming of the Europeans, the Indians moved to the southern part of the continent towards Texas so they could avoid the spread of British on the upper side of the continent. They also did move southwards past Texas into Mexico to avoid the influence of the Spanish. The Indian tribes ended up settling in Texas in between the 2 categories of the Europeans. The new land of Texas that they had settled in was small, and it was brought with a lot of competition for the resources that were available. The Indians were also victimized by the American government after they had been overpowered in the battle. which were mainly led by Colonel Ronald Mackenzie. The reign of President Lamar saw many Indians being brutally engaged in battles with the U.S. Army. The Indian survivors were taken to live in reservations in Oklahoma, a region that was referred to as the Indian Territory. The effect of the action was that it resulted in more land in Texas Americans to settle, while the Indians were congested and concentrated in the reservations. The conclusion. The information concerning the Indians contains a lot of controversies, gaps, and missing links. The reason for the gaps in the information of the history of the Indians is the different sources writing information according to how they received and understood it. The different European people who were present during the existence of the Indians were not well conversant with the different variations of the Indian languages. The authors of the primary sources ended up using information that was not very clear to those relaying the information. Some of the errors that had been made as the history of the Indians of Texas are the different references to similar things. The differences come in that the difference sources containing the information could have used information that was perceived differently from how it was intended. The biased and wrong information has therefore been passed down by many generations, with each generation having information that had been further diluted and distorted. The distortion of the information has also arisen from the modernization of society. The society is no longer a community-based society, but a society that is based on individualism. A society where an individualism is an important element does not favor the preservation of historical information. In the first place, it eliminates the ability to learn the aspects of a community, as there is no community to study in the first place. Consequently, information will not transcend down the generations to be preserved. The modernization of the society therefore presents a challenge to studying history of a community as large and diverse as the Indians. The first lesson that can be learned in this violence does not settle disputes, but it only aggravates the problem to an unimaginable level. When one tribe acted violently against another Indian tribe, the other Indian tribe would also retaliate in violence. This series of violent fights and retaliations created a nerve-seizing cycle that kept on increasing the devastating effects of the original act of violence. Instead of settling the dispute at hand, the reactions of violence led to the loss of lives of the members of Indian tribes. The loss of life is something that can never be reversed, but if the issue were addressed, they could have been solved. The society should also look at better methods of solving the differences that exist within the members of the community. When diplomatic methods are used to solve issues, there is little likelihood of resulting in additional problems. Another lesson that could be drawn from this history of the Indians of Texas is the benefit of having unity even among a nation. For the tribes of Indian in the Texas, the little unity that they had is what enabled them to hold the resistance against the Europeans long enough. The result would have been marvelous if all the Indian tribes were strongly united against the spread and the invasion of Europeans. The number of European settlers was little as compared to the vast number of the Indians. The fact that the course of the European united them against the Indian contributed to their success. If some of the Indian tribes did not collaborate with the Europeans, the Indian tribes would have been more likely to defeat the European settlers.